The asteroid hung in space like a broken tooth, pockmarked and lifeless against the void that surrounded it on all sides. Captain Thelanos pressed two of his four hands against the viewport, his compound eyes reflecting the dull gray surface below as his ship descended toward the ancient facility that nobody had visited in centuries. "This place gives me chills," Dr. Kessa said from behind him, her luminescent skin flickering between blue and pale green, the colors of unease among her people. "It is just an old prison," Security Officer Droog rumbled, his massive frame filling the doorway as he ducked into the command deck. Nothing on this rock but dust and ghosts. Thelanos wasn't so sure about that, but he kept his mandibles closed and focused on the landing sequence instead. The Galactic Coalition had sent them here on what should have been a simple job: inspect the facility, check the structural integrity, and file a report so the bureaucrats could decide whether to demolish it or leave it floating in the dark. Forever simple work for simple pay. Or so Thelanos had thought when he accepted the contract 3 weeks ago. The facility's outer doors groaned open after Droog applied his considerable strength to the manual override, revealing corridors that hadn't seen light in longer than any of them had been alive. There, boots echoed on metal floors as they walked deeper inside. Scanning equipment clutched in Kessa's delicate hands while Droog's weapon swept each corner they passed. "The power grid is still active," Kessa announced, her voice small in the vast emptiness. "How is that possible after so long?" "Fusion cores," Thelanos replied, examining a wall panel that still glowed with faint amber light, built to last 1,000 years without maintenance. "Coalition engineering from the old days." Before they cut corners to save credits, they moved through cell block after cell block, finding nothing but empty cages and the skeletal remains of security stations that had long since been picked clean by salvagers. Thelas was beginning to think the entire trip would be a waste of time when Kessa's scanner began chirping frantically. "Captain, I'm reading an active power signature ahead," she said, her skin now flashing yellow with excitement. Something is still running down there. Down there turned out to be 3 levels below the main prison blocks, in a section marked with symbols that Thelanos didn't recognize, angular and harsh. Unlike the flowing script of modern coalition languages, the security doors here were different too. Thicker, reinforced with materials that his scanner couldn't identify. "Maximum security wing," Droog observed, running one thick finger along the warning signs that covered the walls. Whatever they kept here, they really didn't want it getting out. The chamber they finally entered was circular, with a single cylindrical pod standing in the center like a monument to forgotten cruelty. Frost covered its surface despite the warmth of the room, and through the transparent panel on its front, they could see a figure suspended in frozen sleep. "By the 17 stars," Kessa whispered, pressing close to the pod. Is that what I think it is?" Thelanos had seen pictures in historical archives, images from before the Great Silence fell across the galaxy 4 centuries ago. The being in the pod had smooth skin the color of dark earth, hair like black silk frozen mid-float in the cryogenic fluid, and a face that was eerily symmetrical in a way that most species found unsettling. "A human," he breathed, feeling something cold settle in his thorax. "But that's impossible. They're all gone. Dead or disappeared or—" "Obviously not all of them," Droog interrupted, his weapon now pointed at the pod, as if the sleeping figure might suddenly wake and attack. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Kessa was already interfacing with the pod's control system, her fingers dancing across ancient touch panels that responded to her commands with reluctant beeps and flashes. "The logs are corrupted," she muttered. "I can't access the prisoner records or find out why she was imprisoned here. But the cryostasis is still stable. She could be revived." "Absolutely not," Thelanos said sharply, We report this to Coalition Command and let them decide. This is way beyond our pay grade." But even as he spoke, Kessa triggered something in the system, and alarms began wailing throughout the facility. The pod's frost began to melt rapidly, dripping onto the floor in steaming puddles as internal mechanisms lured to life after centuries of silence. "I didn't mean to," Kessa started. But Thalanos cut her off with a gesture. "Everyone back now." They retreated to the doorway as the pod continued its automatic revival sequence, watching as the human's eyes began to move beneath closed lids and her fingers twitched against the restraints that held her in place. The pod opened with a hiss of released pressure, and the human woman collapsed forward onto her hands and knees, coughing and gasping as her lungs remembered how to breathe. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. The only sound in the chamber was the human's ragged breathing and the distant wail of alarms. Then she raised her head, and Thalanos found himself looking into eyes that were a startling shade of blue, sharp and aware. Despite the centuries of sleep, she scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of a soldier assessing threats, her gaze lingering on each of them for just a fraction too long before moving on when she spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse but steady. "Where am I? How long was I out?" The words came in old Coalition standard, accented strangely but perfectly understandableness. "Step forward," despite Thalanos' warning click, her natural empathy overriding her caution. "You're in a prison facility in the Korvax sector," she said gently. "As for how long, we're not certain, but the facility has been abandoned for at least 400 years. The human's face showed no emotion, but something flickered in those blue eyes. Pain, maybe, or grief too deep for expression. 400 years, she repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. Then the war? Did we win? Did humanity stop the silence? Thalanos and his crew exchanged glances, none of them wanting to be the one to answer. The silence disappeared 400 years ago, Thalanos finally said. As for humanity, we thought your species was extinct. Legends from the old wars that most people don't even believe were real. The human laughed. A harsh sound without humor. Extinct, she said. No, not extinct, just inconvenient. She stood slowly, testing her balance, and even weakened from her long sleep. There was something predatory in the way she moved that made Druk's hand tighten on his weapon. I'm Captain Elena Reeves, she said, looking each of them in the eye. Terran Expeditionary Fleet. 7th Legion, and I need to know, did they really do it? Did they lock us all away? Before anyone could answer, the chamber's communication system crackled to life, and a voice filled with static spoke words that made Thalanos' blood run cold. Alert human biometric signature detected, initiating emergency protocols. Across all connected systems, Coalition Command has been notified. Elena's expression hardened into something that might have been a smile. Looks like people remember us after all, she said quietly. This is going to get complicated very quickly. She wasn't wrong. And as Thalanos watched Coalition security codes flash across every screen in the facility, he realized that finding this human was going to change everything for his crew, for the Coalition, and possibly for the entire galaxy. The universe had trembled once before when humanity walked among the stars. And now, as Captain Elena Reeves stood free for the first time in 4 centuries, it was about to tremble again. The interrogation room was designed for comfort rather than intimidation. But Elena sat in her chair like a soldier at attention, despite the soft cushions and warm lighting that Dr. Kessa had carefully arranged. 3 days had passed since her revival, and Coalition Command had sent their best interrogators, linguists, and historians to speak with the only living human anyone had seen in 400 years. Elena answered their questions with patience that seemed almost endless, repeating her story again and again, while they recorded every word and analyzed every pause in her speech. Tell us again about the silence, the Vrin interrogator said, his mandibles clicking softly in what Elena had learned was a sign of deep concentration. What did they look like? How did they fight? Why were humans uniquely suited to battle them? Elena leaned back, her eyes distant as she pulled up memories that should have been months old, but now felt like ancient history. The silence didn't have a form we could understand, she began. They were our beings that exist partly outside our reality, feeding on fear and suffering like predators feeding on prey. When they attacked, they would appear as shadows that moved wrong, sounds that came from nowhere, whispers that drove entire populations insane with terror before the real killing began. The interrogator's skin rippled with unconscious revulsion, and Elena noted it with the same tactical awareness she brought to everything. Every species they encountered fell apart. She continued, not because the coalition races weren't brave you were, but because the silence weaponized your fear itself, turning it into a tool that broke minds and shattered civilizations. But humans, Darkessa prompted gently from her position near the wall. Elena's lips quirked into something that might have been a smile but held no warmth. Humans were different, she said. We were young, barely out into the galaxy when the silence came. And we had spent our entire evolutionary history being afraid and learning to fight anyway. Fear didn't break us, it made us angry. She stood and began to pace, and Elena noticed how the guards by the door tensed despite the restraint collar around her neck that could drop her unconscious with a single command. The coalition studied us, Elena said, her voice taking on a bitter edge. They found that human neurology processes fear differently. We don't freeze or flee as our primary response. We attack, so they made a deal. Give humanity the resources and weapons we needed, and we would be the sword that struck at the silence while the coalition forces supported us. It worked, the interrogator said, consulting his datapad. Historical records show a sudden reversal in the war approximately 420 years ago, corresponding with human intervention. It worked, Elena agreed. We pushed the silence back system by system. Planet by planet, we died in numbers that would have horrified any other species. But we kept coming, kept fighting, until they finally retreated into whatever dark space they crawled out of. The room fell silent for a moment, broken only by the soft hum of recording equipment. And then? Kessa asked quietly. Then the coalition decided we were too dangerous to let live free. Elena said flatly, we had become too good at killing, too comfortable with violence, too willing to accept casualties in pursuit of victory. They were afraid we would turn on them next. So they rounded us up under the pretense of victory celebrations and disarmament protocols. And they locked us away in facilities like this one, scattered across the galaxy. The interrogator shifted uncomfortably. The official records say humanity went extinct from a plague, he said. That's what most citizens of the coalition believe. A convenient lie. Elena replied, easier to mourn us than to admit what was done. Dr. Kessa moved closer, her empathic abilities clearly picking up the storm of emotions that Elena kept locked beneath her calm exterior. You're angry, Kessa observed, but not as angry as I would expect. Why? Elena turned to face her, and for the first time, something genuine showed in her expression. Because I understand, she said simply. We scared ourselves too. Dr. Kessa, I watched good people become monsters in the name of survival. Saw friends lose themselves in the violence we needed to survive. The coalition wasn't wrong to be afraid of us. They were just wrong and handled that fear before anyone could respond. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility, and the interrogator's communicator erupted with frantic voices. What's happening? Elena demanded, her body shifting into a combat stance despite the restraint collar. The interrogator listened to the voices, his compound eyes widening with each passing second. Long-range sensors have detected anomalies at the edge of the Korvax sector, he said, his voice shaking, energy signatures matching historical records of the silence. The room erupted into chaos as personnel rushed to battle stations. But Elena remained perfectly still, her mind already racing through tactical scenarios and strategic possibilities. "How many ships?" she asked sharply. "Initial scans show 47 vessels," the interrogator replied, reading from his communicator, but the numbers keep increasing. 50, 60, 70. They're still coming through. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of command settling onto her shoulders like an old coat she had hoped never to wear again. "You need to wake my people," she said, opening her eyes and fixing the interrogator with a gaze that had once commanded legions. "Not all of them. Not yet, but you need soldiers who know how to fight the silence. And I'm the only one currently conscious who has that knowledge. The Coalition will never agree to that," the interrogator protested. "We have military forces, advanced weapons, that the silence will tear through like tissue paper." Elena interrupted. "I've seen it happen. Your weapons are designed for conventional warfare against enemies that follow the same physical law as you do. The silence doesn't play by those rules. And if you try to fight them with standard tactics, they will butcher you." Casa stepped forward, placing herself between Elena and the interrogator. "What do you want in exchange for your help?" She asked. Elena appreciated the directness. At least someone here understood how negotiations worked. "Information," she said. "Tell me where the other human prison facilities are located. How many of my people are still alive, and what condition they're in. Help us survive this attack, and I'll help you find a way to wake humanity without them immediately trying to kill everyone who imprisoned them." The interrogator's mandibles clicked rapidly as he consulted with his superiors through his communicator. But Elena could already see the decision in his eyes. "Coalition. Command wants to see a demonstration." He finally said, "They're sending a ship with a skeleton crew. If you can develop tactics that work against the silent scout forces, they'll consider a limited revival of human military personnel." Elena nodded sharply. "Get me access to your ship databases, current military doctrine files, and real-time sensor feeds of the Silence fleet movements," she ordered, already moving toward the door. "And somebody get this collar off me. I can't work effectively if I'm one button press away from unconsciousness." Casa made the decision before the interrogator could protest, entering an override code that released the collar with a soft click. "Don't make me regret this," she said quietly. Elena met her eyes and saw genuine concern there, not for the Coalition or for herself, but for Elena as a person who had lost everything and was being asked to fight again. "I'll do my best," Elena replied with equal honesty. "The war has a way of making us all regret things eventually." The next 18 hours passed in a blur of tactical briefings, ship modifications, and heated arguments with Coalition military officers who didn't want to take orders from a revived relic of forgotten wars. But when Captain Thelanos' ship encountered the vanguard of the Silence fleet near an asteroid mining colony, it was Elena's voice that came through the communication systems, calm and assured as she directed them through maneuvers that no Coalition tactician would have ever considered. "Ignore the shadows on your sensors. They're just projections meant to make you waste ammunition," she instructed. "Focus. Fire on the gravitational distortions instead. That's where the real ships are anchoring themselves to our reality." Thelanos followed her commands despite every instinct screaming at him to do otherwise, and watched in amazement as his weapons, previously firing at empty space, suddenly connected with targets that shrieked across every frequency as they burned. "Now break formation and scatter." Elena continued, The silence expects you to fight in organized groups. Deprive them of that predictability. The battle lasted only 11 minutes, but when it was over, the mining colony was safe, and 3 silence vessels had been destroyed with minimal Coalition casualties. News of the victory spread through Coalition channels faster than light itself. And by the time Thelanos returned to base, the decision had been made. Operation Reveille is authorized. Coalition Command announced, begin revival protocols for human military personnel. Humanity's prison term is temporarily suspended. Elena stood at the viewport of the station, watching ships depart toward coordinates she had provided, the locations of human cryo facilities scattered across the galaxy. 400 years, she murmured to herself. 400 years asleep. And we wake to find ourselves needed again. Kessa joined her at the viewport, her skin glowing soft blue in the dim light. Are you ready for this? The doctor asked. To see your people again? To lead them into war once more? The human prison world was called Facility 7 in Coalition records. But Elena thought of it simply as a tomb that was about to give up its dead. The installation stretched for kilometers beneath the surface of a barren moon. Row upon row of cryogenic pods containing 50 million souls who had gone to sleep believing they had won the Wano. Elena walked those rows with Dr. Kessa at her side, feeling the weight of every frozen face that passed by her field of vision. We're starting with military personnel as agreed, Kessa said, consulting her tablet. First priority are command staff and tactical specialist people. You'll need to organize the others as they wake. Elena nodded but remained silent, her eyes scanning the data panels on each pod she passed until she found the one she was looking for. This one first, she said, placing her hand on a pod that contained a man with close-cropped hair and a scar across his left cheek. Marcus Chen. My second in command. If anyone can help me make sense of this mess, it's him. The revival process took 3 hours, monitored carefully by Coalition medical staff who watched in fascination as human physiology responded to stimuli in ways their databases had never recorded. When Marcus finally opened his eyes, his first words were, "Did we win?" Elena smiled sadly. "That's complicated," she replied. "How about we get you cleaned up and fed first? Then I'll explain why we're both awake 400 years later than we planned to be." Over the next week, they woke 2,000 military personnel, soldiers, pilots, engineers, and tacticians who had fought the silence in the original war. Each awakening followed the same pattern: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally grim acceptance as they learned what had been done to them and why they were being woken now. They used us and threw us away, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez said during one of the group briefings, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. And now that their precious coalition is in danger again, suddenly we're useful enough to let out of our cages? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled humans, and Elena could feel the anger building like pressure in a sealed container. "You're right," she said, silencing the room with those 2 words. "They did use us, and they did betray us. And if you want to spend the next month being angry about that, I won't stop you. You've earned that anger." She paused, looking at faces she had known for years and new faces that belonged to soldiers from different legions she had only heard about. But the silence doesn't care about our grievances. Elena continued, "They're coming, and if we don't stop them, everyone in this galaxy dies, including the millions of humans still asleep in facilities like this one. So here's what I'm proposing. We help the coalition survive this war. We prove that humanity can be trusted with freedom. And then we negotiate for the release and rehabilitation of our entire species. And if they refuse?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena met his eyes, and he saw something hard and unyielding there. "Then we'll deal with that when the time comes," she said. "But first, we survive." The vote was unanimous. though Elena suspected many shared Marcus's unspoken thoughts about what dealing with it might eventually require. Training began immediately, with humans teaching coalition military forces tactics that seemed insane by conventional standards. "You want us to charge directly at the enemy?" a Krogoth commander asked incredulously. "While they're firing at us?" "Yes," Elena replied patiently. "The silence feeds on hesitation and fear. If you give them time to get inside your head, you've already lost. But a direct assault will result in casualties." The commander protested. Elena's expression hardened. "Every battle results in casualties. The question is whether those casualties achieve something. 20% losses taking an objective is acceptable. 80% losses running away is not." The cultural clash was immediate and profound, with coalition officers horrified by human willingness to accept acceptable losses while humans found coalition tactics overly cautious to the point of paralysis. Dr. Kessa found herself mediating between the two groups, using her empathic abilities to bridge gaps that logic alone could not cross. "They're not heartless," she explained to a group of coalition officers after a particularly heated strategy session. "Humans mourn their dead as deeply as any species. They've just learned to function through that grief in ways we haven't had to." Meanwhile, she spoke to the humans with equal honesty about coalition values. "They're not cowards," she told Sarah Martinez, who had made that accusation during combat drills. "They simply haven't had to develop the same tolerance for sacrifice that you have. Their wars were fought differently." Slowly, reluctantly, understanding began to develop between the two groups, built on shared training exercises and long conversations over meals. Then, the call came. A silent vanguard force was attacking an agricultural world called Harvest, and joint human coalition forces were being deployed to defend it. Elena stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching as 30 coalition vessels and 15 human crewed fighters assembled in formation. "Remember your training," she said, over the open channel. "The silence will try to make you afraid. Let that fear sharpen your focus instead of dulling it. Humans, show our coalition allies how it's done. But don't be stupid about it. We need you alive for the next fight." The battle for Harvest began when the silent ships phased into reality above the planet's largest city, their presence immediately causing panic among the civilian population below. Coalition ships opened fire first, their weapons blazing against targets that flickered in and out of existence like candles in a strong wind. "They're not committing," Marcus observed from the tactical station. "Just probing our defenses. Then let's show them something worth committing to." Elena decided. Human squadrons. Execute Patton Fenrir. The human fighters broke formation and dove directly toward the largest silence vessel, weapons blazing as they wove through defensive fire that would have shredded any coalition pilot who attempted the same maneuvers. To the coalition forces watching, it looked like suicide, but then the human ships pulled up at the last second, having drawn the silence vessel's full attention, and coalition heavy weapons fired into the exposed weak points that Elena's pilots had deliberately revealed. The silent ship buckled and collapsed, its death throes sending feedback through whatever connection linked it to its sister vessels. It worked. Darkessa breathed from her observation post. Your people actually made it work. But the celebration was premature. The silence responded to the loss by committing their full force. And suddenly, the space above Harvest became a killing field. Human pilots died first, trading their lives to create openings for coalition weapons to exploit. Coalition cruisers died next, overwhelmed by silence vessels that phased through their shields like ghosts passing through walls and the command bridge. Elena watched the casualty reports climb and forced herself to feel nothing, because if she let herself feel the weight of each death, she would be unable to give the orders that might save the living. All ships, execute. Withdrawal to fallback position Delta. She commanded. Human squadrons provide cover. Acceptable loss threshold is 40%. Marcus looked at her sharply. That's a death sentence for most of them, he said quietly. I know, Elena replied, her voice empty of emotion. Do it anyway. The withdrawal was brutal and chaotic, with human fighters throwing themselves at silence vessels to buy seconds for coalition ships to escape by. The time the combined fleet reached the fallback position, 17 human pilots had died along with 3 coalition cruisers, but Harvest was still standing. Its population evacuated, and the Silence Vanguard force reduced to scattered remnants. Victory, Elena thought bitterly, tasted like ash in the aftermath. Coalition Command praised the operation as a stunning success. Minimal casualties compared to projections. The planet saved. The Silence dealt a significant blow, but that night, Elena attended the memorial service for the human pilots who had died, and she saw the faces of the survivors haunted, grief-stricken, but still standing. You did well today, she told them. Knowing the words were inadequate, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her eyes red from crying. Did we? She asked. Because from where I'm standing, we just proved to the coalition that humans are still expendable, still willing to die so they don't have to. Elena had no answer for that, because Sarah was right and they both knew it later as she sat alone in her quarters. Darkessa found her staring at the casualty list on her tablet. You're carrying too much, Casa said gently, sitting down beside her. No one person should bear the weight of so many lives. Someone has to, Elena replied, and I'm the one they'll follow. Cass's skin pulsed with soft blue light, and Elena felt a wave of genuine compassion wash over her. Not pity, but true understanding from someone who saw her not as a weapon or a commander, but as a person. Then at least let someone help you carry it, Cassa said. Elena looked at her. This alien doctor, who had shown her more kindness in the past weeks than she had received in the years before her imprisonment, and felt something crack in the armor she had built around her heart. They're waking more of my people tomorrow, she said quietly. 10,000 this time, to meet the escalating threat, and each one will look to me to tell them their suffering had meaning, that their sacrifice will lead to something better than what we had before. What if I'm wrong? She whispered. Facility 7 had transformed from a tomb into something resembling a military base, with 50,000 humans now awake and more being revived every day. Elena walked through the temporary barracks, listening to conversations in a dozen different languages and dialects as people from different eras of Earth's history tried to find common ground in their shared imprisonment. It's strange, Marcus commented as he fell into step beside her. We've got soldiers here from conflicts that ended centuries before some of us were even born. The cultural gap between a 22nd century Korean Marine and a 24th century Brazilian pilot is almost as big as the gap between us and the coalition species. Almost, Elena agreed, but we all share one thing. We were all deemed too dangerous to exist freely. They entered the command center, where representatives from the newly awakened legions had gathered for the daily briefing. General James Okonkwo, a veteran of the First Contact Wars who had been asleep for 430 years, stood at the head of the table examining tactical displays. The Silence has established beachheads in 17 systems, he reported in a voice that carried decades of command authority. Coalition forces are holding the line, but barely. They need our help. Which brings us to the question we've been avoiding, said Commander Li Wei, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. What exactly is our objective here? We're fighting the Silence, yes, but then what? Do we really think the coalition will just let us go free once we've served our purpose again? The room fell silent, and Elena could feel the tension building as everyone turned to look at her. I don't know, she admitted. and saw a surprise ripple through the assembled officers. The coalition leadership is divided. Some want us free. Some want us back in cryosleep the moment the threat passes. And some want us dead to prevent any possibility of revenge. Then, why are we helping them? Someone called from the back. Elena's expression hardened. Because there are millions of humans still frozen in facilities across the galaxy. And if we want any hope of freeing them, we need to prove we can be trusted. And because, if the silence wins, our entire species dies frozen or awake. General Okonkwo nodded slowly. Survival first. Politics second, he said. It's not ideal. But it's pragmatic. Pragmatic, Li Wei repeated with bitter amusement. That's what we've always been, isn't it? Humanity's greatest strength and worst weakness, we're willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Before anyone could respond, Diakesa entered the command center, accompanied by Sarah Martinez and several other humans who were not military personnel. I thought you should know, Kessa said. Addressing the room, we've begun waking non-military humans, medical staff, engineers, teachers, artist people who can help us remember what humanity is beyond warfare. Sarah stepped forward, her expression defiant. We've been talking, she announced, and we've decided that we don't want to be defined solely by our ability to kill. We want to build something. Create something that proves humanity deserves freedom, not because we're useful weapons, but because we're people. Elena felt something stir in her chest. Hope. Maybe. Or the memory of what hope felt like. What did you have in mind? She asked. Sarah gestured to her companions. We want to establish a cultural exchange program with coalition civilians. Art, music, literature, food, all the things that make us human beyond our capacity for violence. We want them to see us as more than soldiers before it ends. General Okonkwo frowned. That's a security risk, he objected. If coalition civilians start sympathizing with us, their leadership might see it as a threat, or they might see it as an opportunity for genuine reconciliation. Kessa countered. My people are tired of being afraid. If they can learn to see humans as neighbors instead of weapons, that fear might finally end. Elena looked at Sarah, at Kessa, at the assembled military commanders who represented humanity's warrior tradition, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. Do it, she said. Start small, controlled environments, but show them who we are beyond the battlefield. And if the coalition leadership objects, Marcus asked, then we'll deal with that. Elena replied, but I'm betting that most ordinary people, human or alien, just want to live their lives in peace. Maybe it's time we gave them that chance. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen across the joint coalition human bases. Human medics worked alongside Lumari healers, sharing techniques and learning from each other's approaches to medicine. Human engineers collaborated with Vrin technicians, their different perspectives leading to innovations neither could have achieved alone. And in the recreation areas, humans taught coalition personnel about Earth's lost cultures while learning about the rich histories of worlds they had never seen. Dr. Kessa found herself spending more time with Sarah Martinez, who had been a teacher before the war and seemed determined to become one again. What was Earth like? Kessa asked one evening as they shared a meal. Before the war, before everything changed? Sarah's eyes grew distant. Beautiful, she said softly. Complicated, messy, full of problems we thought were the end of the world at the time, but beautiful. We had oceans that stretched to the horizon, mountains that touched the sky, cities where millions of different people somehow managed to live together despite all our differences. She paused, blinking back tears. I don't even know if Earth still exists, she admitted. Nobody will tell us what happened to our homeworld. Kessa reached across the table and took her hand. I'll find out, she promised. You deserve to know what Kessa discovered. After days of searching through classified coalition archives, nearly broke her heart. Earth existed. But it had been quarantined, declared off-limits to prevent any humans from attempting to return there. The planet still bore scars from the war with the Silence. And Coalition xenorchaeologists had spent the past 4 centuries studying human civilization. Like a dead culture in a museum when she told Sarah, the human woman wept not for what Earth had become, but for the violation of having their entire species treated as artifacts rather than living people. But even grief could not stop the gradual thawing of relations between humans and coalition species, built on countless small moments of genuine connection. Then, the call came that everyone had been dreading. The Silence's main fleet had been detected. Thousands of ships moving toward the fortress world of Bastion Prime Coalition Command initiated a full mobilization. And every available vessel, human and alien, was ordered to Bastion for what would likely be the decisive battle of the war. Elena stood before the assembled human forces, looking at faces that ranged from teenagers to veterans who had lived through Earth's most brutal conflicts. "I won't lie to you," she began. "This is going to be the hardest fight any of us have ever faced. The Silence is coming with everything they have, and many of us won't survive the day." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "But I want you to remember something. We're not fighting this battle alone anymore. We have allies now, people who have seen us as more than weapons, who have shared meals with us and laughed at our jokes and mourned our dead alongside us. We're fighting for them. Yes, but we're also fighting for ourselves, for the right to exist, to be free, to be human without apology." Marcus stepped forward and raised his voice. "For humanity." He called. The response was immediate and thunderous. "For humanity." But then Sarah Martinez added her voice. "For all of us." She shouted, "For every species fighting against the Silence." And the humans took up that cry as well, their voices blending in a declaration that transcended species boundaries in the coalition sections of the fleet. Alien crews heard those voices and felt something shift in their perception of the humans they had feared for so long. These weren't mindless killing machines or soulless warriors. They were people, fighting for the same reasons anyone fights: to protect those they care about and to secure a future worth living in. The Arcessa found Elena on the observation deck hours before the fleet was scheduled to depart for Bastion Prime. "I've been thinking," Kessa said quietly, "about what happens after assuming we survive." "And?" Elena prompted. "I think we should propose a joint commission," Kessa continued. "Humans and coalition species working together to wake the rest of your people slowly, carefully, with proper support and integration rather than just opening all the facilities at once." Elena turned to look at her, seeing genuine hope in the Lamari doctor's glowing features. "You really think they'd agree to that?" she asked. "After this battle, I think the coalition will have no choice," Kessa replied. "You'll have proven your value beyond any doubt, not as weapons, but as allies." "I hope you're right," Elena said, "because I'm tired of fighting." "Kessa, I just want my people to have a chance at peace." Kessa moved closer, her skin pulsing with warm gold light. "Then let's survive tomorrow," she said, "and we'll build that peace together." As the fleet prepared to jump to Bastion Prime, Elena allowed herself one moment of vulnerability. She thought about all the humans still sleeping, dreaming of a victory that had turned to ashes and a homecoming that had never arrived. She thought about the coalition species who had imprisoned them out of fear but were now willing to fight beside them, and she thought about the future that might exist beyond the coming battle, a future where humanity could be more than soldiers, where they could finally rest. But first, they had to survive. The universe was about to tremble once more, and this time, Elena. Bastion Prime hung in space like a jewel carved from steel and determination. Its massive defense platforms bristling with weapons that represented the coalition's last desperate hope around it. The combined fleet assembled, 3,000 coalition vessels, and 800 human-crewed ships, facing an enemy that darkened the stars themselves with its numbers on the bridge of the flagship Resolute. Elena stood beside Coalition Fleet Admiral Vexthara, a four-armed Krogoth whose tactical genius was legendary among his people. They outnumber us 5-1, Vexthara rumbled, his secondary eyes tracking the incoming Silence Fleet on the tactical display. And those are just the ships we can detect. There may be twice that many phasing in and out of our reality. Then we need to make sure every shot counts, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the fear that coiled in her gut. She had led battles before, had faced overwhelming odds, and survived through skill and sacrifice. But nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of what was coming. The Silence Fleet emerged from hyperspace, like a wound opening in reality itself. Thousands of vessels that defied conventional geometry and seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. At their center, larger than any ship Elena had ever seen, was something that hurt to look at directly, a structure that seemed to be assembled from the screams of dying civilizations. That's new, Marcus said from the tactical station, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his console. Intelligence designated it the consuming choir. Vexthara explained, we believe it's the nexus point for the Silence's collective consciousness. Destroy that, and the entire fleet may collapse. Elena studied the entity, her tactical mind already running through scenarios and dismissing most of them as suicide. It's too well defended, she said. Any ship that gets close will be torn apart before it can deliver a meaningful strike. Unless, a new voice said from the doorway. We use Protocol Autumn. Elena spun around to find herself facing General James Okonkwo, accompanied by a dozen other senior human officers and Dr. Kessa, whose skin was pulsing with anxious purple light. How do you know about that? Elena demanded, her voice sharp. Okonkwo stepped forward, his expression grave, because half of us were part of the original planning committee 400 years ago. He said, we developed Protocol Autumn as humanity's final option against the Silence, a weapon so powerful and so terrible that the Coalition imprisoned us to prevent its use. Admiral Vexthara's weapon hands twitched toward his sidearms. What kind of weapon are we talking about? He asked. Elena closed her eyes, memories flooding back, memories she had tried to bury for centuries. The Autumn device, she said quietly, a quantum destabilizer designed to sever the Silence's connection to our reality permanently. But the cost is why they locked us away. Okonkwo interrupted. The device requires a massive energy signature to activate, and the only way to generate that much power is through synchronized human consciousness. Elena finished. Tens of thousands of minds operating in perfect harmony, channeling their combined willpower into a single moment of absolute defiance. She looked at Kessa, saw the horror dawning in her luminescent features. The original plan called for 300,000 humans to link their minds through the device. Elena continued, most would have survived, but the psychological trauma would have been catastrophic. We would have been changed, broken in ways that might never heal. The Coalition called it a crime against sapient life. Okonkwo said bitterly. They said no victory was worth that price, and when we disagreed, they made sure we could never activate the device by locking us away. The bridge fell silent except for the distant rumble of the Silence Fleet's approach. Do we still have the device? Marcus asked quietly. 3 of them. Actually, Okonkwo replied, hidden in Facility 7's deepest levels. We were going to use them as leverage if the Coalition tried to eliminate US rather than imprison us. Admiral Vexthara slammed a fist against the command console. This is madness, he declared. I won't allow you to sacrifice your people like that. There has to be another way. There isn't, Elena said, a voice heavy with finality. I've run every scenario. Admiral conventional weapons won't work, and the consuming choir will tear through our defenses before we can evacuate even a fraction of Bastion Prime's population. But there might be a modification, Dr. Kessa interjected, stepping forward with her tablet extended. I've been studying human neurological patterns since Elena woke up, and I think I can reduce the required participants from 300,000 to perhaps 30,000, maybe less. How? Elena asked. By including non-human consciousness in the link. Kessa explained. If Coalition volunteers join the network, they can help share the psychological burden humans provide the core resonance that disrupts the silence. But the rest of us help anchor the device. Okonkwo shook his head. That's never been tested. He objected. We have no idea if alien neurology can even interface with the device. Then we test it now, Kessa said firmly, because the alternative is letting the silence consume this entire sector. And I'm not willing to accept that. Elena looked at the Lomari doctor, this gentle being who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, and felt something crack in her chest. You understand what you're volunteering for? She asked softly. The link will expose your mind to the worst of what humans have experienced, our capacity for violence, our tolerance for horror, our willingness to sacrifice anything for survival. Kessa met her eyes without flinching. Then I'll finally understand what made you who you are, she replied, and maybe, just maybe, you'll understand that you don't have to carry that burden alone anymore. The decision was made quickly after that, with volunteers from both human and coalition forces stepping forward to join the network. 30,000 minds, 20,000 human, and 10,000 alien, all willing to risk psychological annihilation to save the galaxy. The Autumn device was brought up from Facility 7's depths, a crystalline structure that seemed to hum with potential energy even while dormant engineers worked frantically to modify it based on Kessa's specifications. While the battle for Bastion Prime began, in earnest, coalition ships fought with desperate courage, buying time with their lives as the Silence Fleet advanced relentlessly toward the planet Human. Squadrons executed suicide runs against the consuming choir's outer defenses, each attack costing dozens of lives, but gradually weakening the entity's protective barrier on the flagship bridge. Elena coordinated the defense while simultaneously preparing for the device's activation. Her mind split between tactical necessity and the knowledge that she might be about to break 30,000 people beyond repair. The device is ready, Kessa reported, her voice calm despite the fear Elena could see in her bioluminescent patterns. All volunteers are in position. We can begin the linking sequence on your command. Elena looked at the tactical display, watching coalition and human ships die by the dozens. As the silence pressed its advantage, she looked at Marcus, who nodded once, a gesture of trust that said more than words ever could. She looked at Admiral Vex Thara, who had placed the fate of his entire civilization in her hands. Begin the sequence, Elena ordered. The world contracted to a single point of crystalline clarity as 30,000 minds reached out across the void and touched, forming a network of consciousness that transcended species boundaries. Elena felt Kessa's presence beside her, warm and bright, and filled with compassion that made her want to weep. She felt Marcus's steady determination, Sarah Martinez's fierce hope, General Okonkwo's warrior pride, and she felt 10,000 alien minds, each bringing their own unique perspective, their own reasons for fighting, their own dreams of a future beyond this moment together. They became something greater than the sum of their parts. The Autumn device blazed to life, and the combined consciousness of 30,000 beings focused into a single declaration that echoed across dimensions. No more fear, no more feeding on suffering, no more consuming civilizations. To sustain your existence, you will leave our reality and never return. The consuming choir screamed, as the device's energy tore through its connection to their dimension. And every silent ship in the fleet convulsed as if struck by invisible lightning. Elena felt the psychological backlash as the silence fought against the disruption, attempting to use its usual tactics of inducing fear and despair to break the network. But the humans in the link had lived with fear their entire lives. And the coalition volunteers had something the silence had never encountered before: the knowledge that they fought alongside warriors who would never abandon them. The network held, and the autumn device reached full power. Elena made the final choice, pouring every ounce of her will into the activation sequence. The last thing she heard before the device discharged was Kessa's mental voice. "We're with you." Reality bent. And for a fraction of a second, every being linked to the device existed in multiple states simultaneously, alive and dead, whole and shattered, victorious and defeated. Then the moment passed, and the consuming choir simply ceased to exist. The silence fleet dissolved like shadows exposed to sudden light, their ships flickering out of reality one by one until nothing remained but the debris of battle on the flagship bridge. 30,000 people woke from the linking sequence. Some were weeping, some were laughing, many were simply staring in